Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is March 21st, 2021, and it's time for a COVID-19 check-in. How bad are things? How are they going to be? If you like this video, please click the like button and the subscribe button and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link in the description to the Patreon. Okay, so let's start off with some raw COVID numbers. COVID started in the United States. It was recognized just over a year ago today. So basically, every day that we have data for in this year, we also have data from a year ago today. To me, this is with some additional context about whether the curve is going up or down, etc. But to me, that is the basic context or the basis of evaluation that we want to look at. Is it's been a year. The USA and world did stuff for a year. Well, what have been the effects? What has been the effect on COVID of the policies pursued now for over a full year? Well, what we see is that last March right around this time, it was still peaking. And then early April, COVID peaks. In the United States, peaks around 40,000 new cases a day, then starts to decline. And through April and May, the curve is lowering and flattening. And then they reopened. Why not? I know why not, because it wasn't over. And guess what happened? Massive, massive spike in the COVID daily numbers. That's not even slightly surprising. Not even a little bit. Okay, well, things were going pretty bad, like more than twice as bad as they were when the shutdown was put into place. What did they do to mark things getting twice as bad? They cut off the fucking aid. Because that ought to help, right? No. Then guess what? They sent kids back to school, resulting in the clusterfuck that you see in the November and December and January numbers, which are atrocious. So many needless deaths and injuries. Because remember, the problem with COVID is not just death. It's lung damage, it's kidney damage, it's blood clots, it's all kinds of shit. All kinds. In January, Biden and Harris come into the White House. There's a huge emphasis on back to normal imagery and messaging. They start to roll out the vaccines, which go to the older people first, who are the primary fatalities when it comes to dying of COVID. Being older certainly is a risk factor. And it's also been ravaging nursing homes. That's been a running problem consistently. So what's been the result? Well, since the December-January numbers, which of course, there's Thanksgiving and Christmas and Hanukkah and all the winter holidays, the Super Bowl and all that stuff, the numbers have come down in terms of the number of daily cases. But where are they? And what's the prognosis? Well, you can see for the United States that the curve is gently coming down. It's not coming down perhaps as sharply as we would like to see. But where is the curve compared to a year ago? It's almost twice as bad as it was a year ago. So we can say that, then it was peaking or whatever. The curve was, it hit that peak around this time, like basically a week from today. It was peaking and then it started to, drop and level out, and then it spiked in the summer. Well, whereas it peaked at 40,000 then, we're at 60,000 right now. So it is in fact worse than it was a year ago. It's been a whole year and it is worse. Significantly so, I would say. There is a vaccine now. I plan to get it. I would recommend other people get it. You can, if you can have some choice in which one you get, exercise your choice, but get it. But the vaccine, it's not going to completely eradicate the thing. It's going to be around for years. like probably at least 3 to 5 years. So it's going to become a fixture on the landscape. What are we going to see this year? I mean, I'm already seeing people, I don't know if it's just, fatigue from distancing or fatigue from just giving a shit. People in the US are not terribly good about caring about other people's feelings for the most part. Being conscientious, having social awareness. I already see people just forgoing distancing. I was talking to a friend, was out for a walk, and there was nobody around for 30 feet. Yet somebody walked right past them. Right past them, like within 2 feet. They had all this free range, and the person walked right past them, not wearing a mask. Schools are reopened as of recently. What's the fallout from that going to be? I don't think it's going to be good. And then this summer, if we're at twice as bad as it was last year, and the vaccine doesn't end up being a complete magic bullet, which it probably won't. I mean, what it will probably do is reduce severity, and then, perhaps contracting it at all in some cases. And that's great. I really look forward to that. I wonder, though, if stupidity, like people not trying to compensate behavior-wise for public health is going to wind up still keeping the numbers a lot higher than they ought to be, regardless. Because, again, a lot of people are going to get this vaccine and think, oh, I can act like everything's normal. Well, no, you can't. You can't. And if you're thinking that, please adjust your thinking immediately, because that's not the way it works. You get the vaccine so that being careful is that much more likely to pay off, not so that you don't have to be careful. That's not how it works. All right. So that's the US. On the world stage, the COVID curve is actually going up. And we have seen the US lagging a little bit behind the rest of the world. So that may be coming to the US soon, that the curve actually goes back up again, despite the vaccine and everything, because there are new strains that are more contagious, etc. If we look at Europe's curve, if we look at Africa's curve, if we look at Asia's curve, these are all going up. And the overall world curve is going up. Used to be the U.S. was leading that. Not this time, although the U.S. may catch up and contribute to it. So not encouraging news. A year after the outbreak was recognized and news was spread to the global masses, we're worse off. All right. So that's a brief check-in on where we are with COVID, not intended to be comprehensive. Do you have other interesting COVID facts? Please leave them in the comments. I can probably put them into a later video. Okay, but the other big question about COVID is the socioeconomic political fallout. What's that going to be? Well, I came across this article the other day that said this will not be the roaring 20s. There's not going to be a huge bounce back after COVID. And honestly, my thought looking at that article, maybe it's just I do a lot of, historical analysis from like a Marxist perspective. But I was like, yeah, did anyone think that there was going to be? And I guess some people desperate to believe that we are, quote, going back to normal, which, need I remind you, wasn't very good. So there's that. We're not going back to that. We can't, no matter how many times Joe Biden promises it. It's not possible. The U.S. has been declining in global influence for a long time. It's trying to cling to power with naked military force. It is not seen as the most reliable development partner for good reason. It isn't. Capitalists tied to the U.S. Western imperialist system want short-term profits. They're sharks. They're vultures. They want to tear up your country, put it in a blender, and chug it. They're not really interested in long-term development, sustainable development that actually protects human interests, workers' rights, ecological health, etc. They want it all, and they want it now. Why would you partner with someone like that if you have an alternative? And people do have an alternative. China. I really welcome China's Belt and Road project and all the infrastructure and investment that they're bringing to countries, helping them develop in a way that is, people call it imperialism sometimes. People don't know what they're talking about. It's nothing like that. It's not the debt traps of the IMF. They give grants and loans. If countries can't repay the loans, a lot of times they're just forgiven. Whereas the U.S. goes in, and the IMF and the World Bank, it's like the housing bubble. They give loans. They know that countries can't possibly repay. And there's all these strings attached that say, oh, if you can't repay them, you have to do austerity. In other words, you have to make social spending cuts because your first priority is to repay this loan. You can't make any other priorities. And if you do, we'll kill you. And it's a whole well-established system. There's a lot of literature on that. It's been known for a long time. So the U.S. is mishandling this COVID thing to an incredible degree. Europe's not doing that well either. All of this is on display for the world to see. Socialist countries tend to handle it a lot better. Okay, more evidence that socialism is a superior system. It is the system of the future. It is our mandate to adopt it. Great. Well, let's check in now with some of the illusions of people who think that there is this big recovery coming around the corner. This isn't controversial to say that that's not coming. I did a video a couple weeks ago about the U.S. Bureau of, I'm not going to mess this up, but basically it was the U.S. Labor Department, and they were saying that the estimate for unemployment is that unemployment is going to stay worse than 2019 levels for a decade. That's not good. Also, in that video, I was talking about the housing market, which is terrible. This system is not doing well. So let's look at the article. This is from Politico. Zach Stanton, March 18, 2021. Post-COVID America isn't going to be anything like the Roaring Twenties. Hopes of a repeat of the post-influenza Roaring Twenties are understandable, but misunderstand the differences between then and now, says historian John M. Barry. I'm not familiar with John Barry. However, I do know Richard Wolff. Some of you may know, socialist economist. He did a video on this just the other day. It's like 5 minutes long. Might want to check that out. I mean, I agreed with the Wolff video entirely. Just basically, coming out of the teens and influenza. First of all, capitalism was still on the upswing at that point. In terms of industry, like delivering, America was still industrializing at that point, I guess. There were, it's still very agricultural, and, there were certainly some very industrialized cities, but there's also like huge rural swaths. I mean, places were still getting electricity and telephones and things like that. Like that was still ongoing. The 20s may have been the Roaring Twenties. They ended with the Great Depression, the crash of 29. Then the 30s were awful. Fascism in Europe, World War II. And then the U.S. emerges victorious from World War II, has no industrial competitors, dominates the world. It's not anything like that today. The U.S. is in decline, not ascent. So having a big disaster like this is really, I would say, hastening that descent. Let's see what they say. Quote, the excitement is palpable. Vaccines are being injected into people's arms. Schools are reopening. Instagram feeds are flooded with Fauci ouchie selfies. The weather is heating up. The sun is out past 7 p.m. and the promise of a post-pandemic summer has Americans frenzied with the anticipation of a 6-year-old waiting to go downstairs on Christmas morning. Quick comment. The reaction of the people of the U.S. to this pandemic has been one of the most atrocious, self-centered, off-kilter priority indicating thing I've ever seen in my life. People just not doing the bare minimum has been so grating to watch. It makes it worse for everyone. And it's like everyone thinks they're special. I call it Burger King syndrome. It's your way right away. That's really what people believe. It's like ingrained in the value system. Me, 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 me. But that makes it worse for everyone. Back to the text. If you believe the hype, we're in for a roaring 20s with all of the frivolity, excess, and licentiousness of the 1920s, when a wave of euphoria washed over much of the world after the ending of both the influenza pandemic and World War I. But what we're about to face is likely to be quite different, says John M. Barry, author of The Great Influenza, The Definitive History of the 1918 Flu Pandemic. Okay, so that's who he is. Perhaps we'll have the post-pandemic economic boom. Comment, keyword perhaps. But there will likely be less of the excess that defined the Roaring Twenties. Quoting Barry, it'll probably be without the sense of disillusionment, without the wildness, without the fatalism, without the survivor's guilt, without asking, why am I alive, Barry says. I don't think anybody who goes on a cruise ship next year, oh God, don't go on a cruise ship, are you out of your fucking mind, is going to be wondering, why am I alive? How come I made it? Psychologically, that was all part of the Roaring Twenties, unquote. The world had come apart. Everybody knew people who died. Everybody. And in most cases, they knew a lot of people who died. What we're facing today is, of course, quite different. It's tragic. Most of the people who've died were elderly, and I'm certainly in the target demographic this time around myself, but there have been relatively few fatalities among otherwise healthy young adults and practically none among children. In 1918, the deaths among young children were astronomical. I don't think this statistic has ever been published, but somebody I know did the calculation that children under the age of 5 died at a rate equal today to all-cause mortality for a period of 23 years. That is a lot of kids, and remember, that's compressed into a time frame of 6 to 10 weeks. There was a kind of tragedy and terror during the course of the flu pandemic in 1918 that's just not there today. So it goes on with statistics for a while. It also mentions you had the economy come back in a very big way. There was a brief recession in 1921. The war industry stopped producing. Remember, war is huge for capitalists. All the contracts, all the production that goes on, that's why they still make planes and all kinds of military equipment that just is never, there's no realistic hope of it ever being used. They just make the shit and then warehouse it or park it in the desert just to fulfill the contracts, because it's like that's the permanent war economy is what's keeping this together. Has been since World War II. The New Deal may have caused some economic compression. It reduced inequality and it stabilized capitalism somewhat. However, it was really the transition to a war economy and the imperialism wrapped around that following World War II, which was the last great contest between imperialists for who was top dog. It's been that transition to the permanent war economy and the production and imperialism tied into that has kept the first world predator nations afloat. So the article moves on talking about some of the epidemiology. So, quote, certainly the consensus view is that this thing, COVID, is here to stay. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the vaccines are not 100% effective, like I was saying before. Number two, there's going to be a significant number of people who never get vaccinated. We may still reach, quote, herd immunity, but the virus will still circulate. That'll be especially true once you get outside the developed world, where vaccines will be widely available. Once you get into parts of South America, Africa, India, India produces as much vaccine as any country in the world. But to vaccinate 80% of its population of 1.38 billion people, that's a pretty big task. There will be a reservoir of people who will never be vaccinated. Comment, notice that they don't mention China, because China's comparable to India. China, though, actually takes care of its people. They take threats like this seriously. They build hospitals fucking overnight. I've showed those videos before on the channel. India is not socialist, so they can't do that. They are dependent on the whims of capitalists and what they consider profitable. Continuing, in addition, this virus seems to pass between people and other mammals very, very easily. That was also true in 1918. Essentially, every mammal was known to be infected by the 1918 influenza viruses. Tigers, moose, even seals. We don't know if it infected whales, but it did infect seals. Pretty clear we gave the virus to pigs in 1918 in Iowa. Similarly, COVID passes very easily from mammals to humans, probably passes very easily back to mammals from humans. Now, I just got to comment, my understanding about COVID is that cats can get it, but dogs can't. Don't quote me on that, but I did hear that several times. Kind of surprised they didn't mention that here. Well, anyway, moving on, they also talk about the politicization. Quote, I'm disappointed that this has been politicized. Things like that didn't happen in 1918. There were official government sources in 1918 who, in effect, said, this is a hoax. They said things like, this is ordinary influenza by another name, but nobody believed it because they saw it. Well, commenting, I mean, that is kind of an attempt to politicize it. They're saying, though, that because people were so clear about the effects, like they saw somebody living across the street dying, that they didn't believe it, so it never caught on. Well, people have seen evidence to the contrary with COVID, but they've chosen to keep living in fantasy land anyway. This is the thing to me about fascist ideology in the modern age, in particular in the US. It requires a stunning amount of willful ignorance. It is truly magical thinking in the sense it requires a suspension of rational thought and belief in absolute nonsense, and they embrace this irrationality wholeheartedly. You can't buy into it without turning your brain off. You really can't. It flies in the face of reality. So I think that this was more of a statement. If it didn't take hold in 1918, it was less because people weren't trying to politicize it, but that people were less willing to buy into it. I think it's that willingness, my opinion, that's the change. Why is that? For another time. Moving on near the end of the article, quote, by the time the CDC makes a judgment that masks are no longer necessary, my guess is that 45 states will already have ended their mask mandates. There may still be private establishments that require them. One thing that has struck me is that I never imagined that so-called non-pharmaceutical interventions could be as effective as they have been when properly applied. I participated in early conceptualizing of the pandemic preparedness plan and was actually a skeptic. I thought they were worth doing. I supported them, but I was skeptical about how much impact they would have. I won't say that this country has improved their effectiveness, but other countries have proved that these measures can be literally unbelievably effective in containing the virus more than I ever imagined. So, yeah, keep distancing, keep washing your hands, keep doing masks, stay away from people, don't go out if you don't have to, etc. It spreads the virus. It's that simple. And then the article concludes with, if the big lesson that you took away from the flu pandemic was about the importance of truth, what at this point do you see as the big lesson of the COVID-19 pandemic? And Barry says, I think the same lesson has been reinforced, and that's why we have 538,000 deaths. And again, like I said, it's almost twice as bad. It's at least 1.5 times as bad right now as it was a year ago. The world curve is going up. The U.S. curve isn't going up right now, but, again, it was lagging behind Europe at this time last year. Maybe it'll catch up. I for sure think they should not have schools be reopening. I don't know what that is about. But this virus did not leave when Trump left the White House. And the Democrats are going to get a lot of people killed with their insistence on going back to normal, air quotes, for political purposes. You could argue that the whole thing is suicidal. I mean, economically and otherwise, to say, we could just go back to the Obama years. Or after Bush, with the first time with Obama, we could just go back to the Clinton years. You can't. That's always fantasy thinking, which is suicidal when it comes to economics. You cannot base a leading global economic powers plans on fantasy. It literally results in death and destruction for millions of people, billions of people when you do that. And then in this case, just a little bit more literally. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for listening. Drop a comment, and we will catch you in the next video. And that's the video. Thanks to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen or just support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/socialismforall and sign up for a monthly donation. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialism4all. Used to have a page at FOR all, and it got throttled to death by Zuck. Here on YouTube, please click the like button, subscribe button, and the notifications bell. Please leave a comment if you can, and please share our video wherever you're online, your Twitter feed, your Discord servers, Reddit subs, etc. All of that helps more people to see this content, whether it's in the YouTube algorithm or just posting it on other sites. All of that's helpful. All of you out there supporting and promoting this content makes it all go that much more smoothly. We need to end capitalism, normalize talking about socialism today, and it's really kind of our only hope for a better tomorrow. Thanks for all you do, and we will catch you in the next video.